At Western, we believe that universities should be places where we explore and even appreciate a diversity of viewpoints and voices, as it makes us think more deeply, analyze more critically, and broaden our perspectives. It's designed to enlighten us, to help us think, to equip us.
The WeTalk initiative is being created to foster a campus culture of responsible and respectful civic, social, political, and policy engagement.
Universities have historically been considered the marketplace of ideas. We can exchange ideas and we can try on new ones and we can discuss them and we can change our minds if something doesn't fit. But even if you change your thinking, what's going to happen is you will still understand that original viewpoint. And that either one of those things makes us stronger as a society.
Action must be preceded by dialogue. And the kind of dialogue in which more people than not feel heard because they are heard.
We, StoryCorps, Western Michigan University, we both want the same things: to counter the current climate of contempt by shining light on our shared humanity and find ways to bring everyday people together.
We spent many years experimenting, putting strangers together for the first time across the political divides, to have a StoryCorps conversation, not to talk about politics, but just to get to know each other as human beings under the premise that it's hard to hate up close. And the dream is that we convince the country that it's our patriotic duty to see the humanity in people with whom we disagree. And no matter where we are in the country, the accents change, the occupations change, but everybody talks about the same thing: their parents, the people they love, death. It's the great themes of human existence.
All of us have a responsibility to treat each other respectfully, to demand civility, to take the tone down, to object to what you're seeing on social media. But I think it needs to start in our communities, where we need to stand up to this lack of respect, treating each other with dignity.
If we can't get this right on college campuses to build what my friend Jake Schrum, college president, calls a community of considerate conversation, right? A place where people can deepen into their own identity and be in positive relationship with people from other identities and cooperate together to enrich everyone. The bumper sticker version of this is simple: respect, relate, cooperate.
Folks, we don't live in a complicated political situation. People want similar things. When you can bring the human out in a conversation, it is profound, especially with the people that you believe are most disagreeable.
But these are called the 7 grandfather teachings because they're important. The first one is respect, acknowledging the inherent value of the people and the world around you. The second grandfather teaching is love for the people in the world around you without expecting that you get something from them. Truth, when you speak, speak the truth, but also speak the things that need to be said. Bravery is one of the grandfather teachings, and it means to do the things that must be done. Wisdom, honesty, and then humility. Just be excellent to each other in the world around you.
As Broncos, we're devoted to the pursuit of knowledge, to the free exchange of ideas, and to engaging in discourse in a manner that causes all of us to grow. Our celebrated WeTalk initiative helps support our efforts to live up to our ideals of advancing viewpoint diversity and embracing free speech.
On behalf of Citizens Rising, we welcome everyone in attendance today. I'm Scott Schrum. I'm the current president of Citizens Rising, and a proud Bronco, I might add. We wish to acknowledge a number of people for being in attendance today. First and foremost, Dr. Montgomery, who's going to speak in a minute, so thank you for being here. We also have Jessica Schwartz, who is a Democratic candidate for Congress. It's a short list. Dr. Montgomery and Mr. Brenneman, thank you for providing this beautiful venue for today's event. This is my first time in the building, and I'm just really impressed and proud to be part of Western. How many first-timers? A lot. Before we start the panel presentation, I'd like to note that Citizens Rising is a new community organization that has been in the making for a little over 3 years. Could the members of Citizen Rising please stand for a moment of acknowledgement? Citizens Rising is a nonpartisan group whose purpose is to move our governmental bodies at the local, state, and national level. And we do that in order to revive a sense of trust and mutual respect within our nation, resolve critical policy issues that have not been addressed because of deadlock between the two parties, and to restore and protect institutional essentials for the well-being of our citizens. We have offered educational sessions to date on dark money, the influence of dark money on the Portage Public School Board elections, election system integrity and security, the importance of local media, and the League of Women Voters. We care about a number of additional issues, and I won't go through them, but they're in this pamphlet, this trifold pamphlet, if you happen to get a copy of it. I'd also like to point out that last week we learned that there's another organization also named Citizens Rising. They're a little bit farther along than us. They actually have a website. Other than the sharing a name, we do not have any affiliation with them. We haven't studied their issues. We just don't know enough about them to know whether or not we would agree with their issues or not. So if you do a web search for Citizens Rising, you'll find them, but not us. I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, WeTalk, WeVote, and the U.S. Association of Former Members of Congress. WeTalk is a WMU-sponsored platform encouraging respectful civic, social, political, and policy engagement. Can the representatives of WeTalk stand so we can thank them for their involvement? Oh. I was just told they were already standing. WeVote is a nonpartisan campus-wide initiative at WMU focused on institutionalizing voting and civic involvement. Can the representatives of WeVote stand for our recognition? They may also already be standing. And then the United States Association of Former Members of Congress is a bipartisan nonprofit voluntary alliance of former U.S. senators and representatives advocating for representative democracy at home and abroad. I know of one member, Grayson Moore. Grayson, could you stand and be acknowledged? He's standing in the back, waving to everyone. And finally, I'd like to thank Fred Upton for encouraging us to pursue this panel presentation and creating the opportunity for us to collaborate with the U.S. Association of Former Members of Congress, WeTalk, and WeVote. I also want to thank Lawrence Productions, who is here today, recording this event. Jerry Brown, the current owner of Lawrence Productions, used to be part of a fantastic band in town called Home. And my wife and I used to go listen to them religiously whenever they were in Kalamazoo, and sometimes we'd go up to East Lansing and listen to them too. So it was really nice to connect with Jerry again, even if it was briefly. And now I'd like to invite Dr. Montgomery to the podium to share a few words with us.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. How you all doing? Good. It's an honor to welcome each of you to Western Michigan University and for this important and incredibly timely conversation on protecting democracy. There's a recent Pew Research Center survey that was done in 2024 ahead of the upcoming elections. And it found that only 19% of Americans believe that the democracy in the United States is a good example for other countries to follow. That tells you that 82% feel that the United States is not a good example of a democracy for the rest of the world to follow. Now, there's an old adage that people get the government that they deserve. What does that mean in context of this poll? The question that we raise and that this panel raises is, are we engaged in the process of picking, selecting, and holding our government and elected officials accountable so that we get a democracy that we're proud of? Or have we taken the way out of saying, pox on politics, I don't like it, it's not pleasant, it's nasty, and so I'll sit at home? And if you sit at home in politics, that has consequences. Elections have consequences. And when you sit it out, you let others determine the outcome and the shape of the country that you inherit. And so participation is the key. Participation is the way in a democracy we exercise our voice in politics. And so these kinds of forums where we talk about how do we participate, but participate in a way that is civil, that doesn't tear at the very fabric of our society, are absolutely critical for us to have, absolutely critical for our students to hear and to model. We as a university are about providing information and truth to our students and helping them think for themselves, to arrive at their own conclusion, and then to be engaged in acting on those beliefs. It's important to have these kinds of opportunities for civil engagement, at the same time that we actively participate in those engagements, and that we model that behavior for the next generation so that our democracy can move forward in a way that's both productive, we get the government that we deserve and that we so clearly want, and the world, in some sense, can return to admiring our experiment that we are in this country. Discussing politics or engaging conversations around the role of government is often fraught undertaking. It's especially true today. And so we can have two choices. We can shirk from it, we won't talk about it. And what happens when you don't talk about it? Does it get better? No. We have to engage. We have to engage. And the only way we get better is by doing it again and again and again. And so we learn the habits that we want to practice and pass those on to our children. It's a time when election integrity dominates the discussions around dinner tables and water coolers. And those of us in higher ed have a leading role to play in reducing polarization and challenge our students to approach political issues with critical thinking and open inquiry, to work to restore hope and confidence in our democratic institutions. At Western, we're proud to be at the forefront of trying to promote diverse perspectives and encouraging debate. Initiatives such as WeTalk and our membership in the Heterodox Academy's Campus Community Network, we challenge Broncos to embrace diverse viewpoints and to engage in meaningful dialogue. Today's conversation is a continuation of that commitment to ensure that we provide a holistic, experience-driven education and to educate our students in understanding our democracy so that they're equipped to protect it. We're delighted to have a distinguished panelist joining us today to share their insights on this important bipartisan conversation. Fred Upton, former U.S. Congressman and recipient of the 2023 WMU Doctor of Laws honorary degree for his achievements as a national leader, a respected public servant, and a longtime advocate for Western Michigan University. Fred? Mark Schauer, former U.S. Congressman and Western alumnus who received his Master's of Public Administration. And former Michigan State Director of Elections, Chris Thomas. Thank you. So I look forward to this exciting engagement, and then I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce Natalie Kraft, Western Student Association Executive Officer for Government Affairs. Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's event, everyone. We're thrilled to have you all here for this important conversation. Like Dr. Montgomery said, my name is Natalie Kraft, and I serve as the Executive Officer for Governmental Affairs in the Western Student Association, which is our student government here at Western. I'm also very proud Bronco, but in this role, I work with the Office of Government Relations to represent student voices and help engage students here on campus. WSA plays a vital role in advocating for the needs and concerns of our students, fostering engagement, and ensuring that students' voices are heard in the decision-making process. 2 weeks ago, we hosted a Civic Engagement Week that took place here in the Student Center, and we had hundreds of students attend our events throughout the week, with the highest attendance being on National Voter Registration Day, which is really encouraging. We had 350 students come out, so that was phenomenal. But one of our key initiatives is also WeVote, that Scott mentioned earlier. WeVote is a nonpartisan, on-campus effort to institutionalize voting and civic engagement here at Western Michigan University. We focus on 3 core messages: registering to vote, making a plan to vote, and most importantly, voting itself. Here at WMU, we're fortunate to have an early voting site here on campus at the Fetzer Center, making it even more convenient for students to cast their ballots. It's amazing to be a part of this bipartisan event today and to see so many students here committed to being informed and engaged voters. But part of WSA, everyone in the cabinet, in the president's cabinet, has a university counterpart. And I'm grateful that mine is Jeff. Jeff is our vice president for government relations, and he put this whole thing together today. So let's give it up for him and start this panel.
Thank you, Vice President Kraft, as I like to refer her. And I'll tell you, she can run circles around me on presidential history. We've had some great conversations in my office. So thank you all for being here. I think, as Dr. Montgomery said, this is about participation. And you being here is that first part of participation in the system, and it's really important. We're going to get to that at the end. Thank you to Citizens Rising for bringing us this opportunity to put this event on Western's campus. It is important for us, and it's part of our way that we can engage with the community in a meaningful way. I want to also say there's things on your seats so you can ask questions, and we try to do this in a way that allows me to get the questions right up here. We don't have to rove around on a mic. So you take the little QR code and you scan it with your phone, and you can then ask a question. I'm going to get it live right up here, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can. But we have a great panel, so let's get to the panel. First of all, I don't think we need to do introductions. Dr. Montgomery did a great job. All I can say is these two are amazing individuals. I've had the pleasure of working with both of them for 25, in Fred's case, 33 years. And I couldn't be more proud to sit up here with them in this role, and boy, they're the embodiment of bipartisan public servants that we should be happy, and they're huge WMU champions as well. So we're glad that both of them are here. And Chris Thomas, 36 years running the elections in the state of Michigan under both Republican and Democratic administration. I don't think anyone's going to probably beat that record, is my guess. They've gotten a little too contentious, and my guess is someone isn't going to have that kind of track record, but I'm sure it took the enormous skill that Chris has to be able to pull that off. So let's get right into it, because we got a lot to talk about, and we want to leave time for your questions. I want to start with Chris. So before we get into the kind of this current state of affairs of our elections, I want to take a look back, Chris. What was your first election in Michigan?
My first election I was here was 1978.
Okay, so what changed between 1978 and your retirement in 2017?
Time's up. Well, I used to have a lot more hair, and it was not this color. So that was a long time ago. And in the elections division, it's now called a bureau, we had 5 incoming phone lines. And when all 5 of them were busy, you got a busy signal, period. I mean, there was no voicemail. There was no email. We used carbon paper to keep track of our copies. So it was a world that we would not recognize today. And the students here certainly would not recognize. We're history books. So what we were doing back then was Michigan's a very decentralized system. We have 1,520 cities and townships that actually run elections and 83 county clerks that have a role in elections. So we're dealing with about 1,600 officials plus the Secretary of State. Our role at Secretary of State is supervising them, and the thought that we could actually supervise 1,600 people is pretty ludicrous, and particularly back in those days. So we kind of churned along. I mean, what we had to do with election results, we would get them from the counties, and they would come in. It would not be until the day after the election, we had like cut and paste all the election returns for state offices. It took that long before. The newspapers were way ahead of us. Our budget director always gave me a quarter and said, you know, I can get these results down the street. You know, why are we paying you all this money when I can do it that way? We had 7 different voting systems in the state. We had punch card, we had the old lever machines, we had some touch screens. So we were very, very different in terms of what we are today. And we kind of churned along through the 80s and in the 90s. And then, of course, Florida hit, right? When you have an election that's decided by 500 and some votes, it wasn't just Florida that got turned upside down. The nation woke up to elections and how elections were run. It was really kind of a backwater operation, not a lot of notoriety, unless there was some big problem. That year, people at Thanksgiving talked about Chad and punch cards and all of that mechanics of elections. And so Congress reacted with the Help America Vote Act, $3.2 billion given out to the states to create statewide voter registration files. We only had city and township. We had 1,500 different files. People could move back and forth, and it took forever for them to get cleared off the previous file. So technology was now being introduced. Michigan was the model for that act in terms of how that was implemented in other states. And of course, in the 90s, we had the National Voter Registration Act, which went a long ways towards bringing Michigan's system of motor voter to the nation. So we moved along, and we've made great progress since then. We have a voter registration system now that's really an election management system. So every absentee ballot for each voter, that is put into this system that can be monitored. There's no longer just each jurisdiction with their own set of books. There's a statewide set of books now. And we've run, I'd say, a very good voter registration system and a very good voting system. Terry Land, when she came in as Secretary of State, 2002, she had the federal money, and she made the decision that we were going to go to paper ballots using optical scan. And so we have a paper record of every ballot. So you mark your ballot, that's the true copy. And when we do recount statewide, we recount the paper. So that is the assurance that people should have in terms of close elections. We are using that paper. And so the state has done nothing more than evolve since then through technology, working with local partners, with electronic poll books now. And it is a world that would not be recognized in 1978.
Which, by the way, was the year, if my history is correct, that Howard Wolpe was first elected to the U.S. Congress.
That could
former
be. Yeah, that's probably
Western.
about right.
Some old timers here might know that. Some younger people might not.
So let's turn to our members of Congress. From your perspective, you didn't have to worry about how people voted. You just wanted them to vote for you. But campaign finance changed a lot over the times when your first elections happened, and maybe the times that you left the political system. Fred, if I'm not mistaken, you were on 36 primary and general election ballots?
25.
Oh, 25. Okay.
18,
you had 25 opponents.
18 November elections and 7 primaries, so a total of 25.
But your name would have been on all 36.
You are correct. Yeah, but unopposed, I don't really. I still voted. I want you to know I still voted.
So talk to us about your early fundraising days. I was telling Fred earlier, I remember in his early days, he would have a fundraiser every year. It was one of his bigger fundraisers in the district, and it was his birthday fundraiser, April 23rd.
It would be $71 this year.
Yeah, it was always his age,
my age.
For a couple.
Yeah, a couple.
So
Yeah,
in his early days, a single individual could come to one of his big events for less than $20.
That's right. And you might even get a coffee cup. We had a coffee cup group too for $25. And you could bring, if you brought the coffee cup the next year, it was free. So
then tell me, compare that to your 2018 campaign.
So we still did. So I've been out of Congress. I retired in 23, in January of 2023. So in 22, we still had a birthday fundraiser, I think. So I was then 69 or 70. So it was for two people. We didn't get a burger and a cash bar, though. We went to a cash bar. Bring your ID, just like we'd go to vote. Things changed a lot. So just one quick little thing. So for those of you that don't know, Jeff actually ran my office really well. He served as an intern for me, and at the time that we collapsed the offices, had an office here in Kalamazoo, I asked Jeff to run the show for me, and he did a wonderful job before he got stolen by Western. And I know he and Lisa are very happy. But you know, I always said this in my campaigns. I said, you know, you put your family first. You do your job second. You make your votes. You come home. You do your mail. You're responsive. You do, you know, all the different things we do. And if you do those two right, the third leg on that stool is the campaign. You do the first two right, the third leg comes along pretty well. We ran ahead of the presidential ticket in every election. Thank goodness. You know, Bill Clinton won our district. Obviously, Obama won the district. I mean, we always ran ahead of the ticket. But things changed a lot on the campaign finance fund. And it's, you know, I got to say that it was disturbing to me to see news last week that there is a single House race. Now, we all represent about the same number of people all across the country. About 750,000 people is about the average. A single House race in New York State this year is going to cost $35 million. And that's a month out. And that doesn't count the dark money, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit later. You know, there's no strings, you don't know what's coming, and it's like, it's just unbelievable to think that amount of money is going to get spent. So you're a little bit like a Boy Scout. I mean, you know, you want to be prepared. And, you know, in my first race, and I beat an incumbent. He made some mistakes. We're not getting into that now. But, you know, we won 56-44. I beat the only incumbent to lose in the country in a primary. 5 years in office, he was. We were outspent 3-1 in that primary. My campaign spent $100,000, of which $35,000 was an unpaid loan by me. So he spent $300,000. Yes, it was on TV the last number of days in newspaper, and you know, the campaigns have changed so much from 1986 to where we are today. But it's ungodly in terms of the amount of money that you have to raise, and the individuals can, you know, they can give increasing amounts based on inflation. I think this year, Mark, I think it's what, $2,800 per cycle for 3,300. Is it 3,300? So one husband and wife can give 6,600. Is that about right? And it'll go up a little bit. But when you got to spend $10 million, that's a lot of couples that you're going to have to spend that much money, and it doesn't happen very often, right? Jessica Schwartz is here. I mean, I don't know how many couples you have maxed out to you. Zero, very small. So it's pretty hard. And PACs can give, but it's the same PAC amount today as it was 20 years ago. $5,000 does not go up based on inflation per cycle. So they can give, you know, to both the primary as well as the general. So you're talking, when you got a raise, and for me, in the last couple year cycles, in our district was, then it was the 6th district, now it's the 4th. was really a perfect square. It wasn't gerrymandered. It was really along county lines, Allegan County, none of Ottawa, all at Kalamazoo County, straight down to the state line. So to the west was Lake Michigan, to the south is Indiana. Really a perfect square. 6 counties, 750,000 people. And I didn't look this up before I came, but in my last election in 2020, I think we had a primary that year as well. I think we ended up spending about $5 or $6 million. So you figure that out.
And that's not including your opponent's money. That's just what
No,
you spent?
that's just what we
Right.
spent. But I can remember an election, I'll close on this. We were doing well in our polls. And, like 2 weeks before the election, I'm doing a breakfast in Matawan. And I get a call from my crew, my campaign crew, and they said, Fred, you won't believe this, but someone just dropped like $300,000 in negative ads on you on Channel 3. Went, oh, where's this money coming from? It was all dark money. It was like, it didn't come from my opponent. It just came out of the blue, and it was just like the weirdest stuff. But we had to be prepared. And all of a sudden, okay, this breakfast is over. I got to go I got to go figure out what I got to do, because we're going to have to go raise some more money. And we're going to have to put up a TV ad to counter this. Within 48 hours, it's got to be up on Channel 8 and Channel 16 down in South Bend, as well as Channel 3 here. And then 3 or 4 days later, I said, Freddie, you won't believe this, but they just added on top of the 250,000. They got another 400,000 that's coming on against you. We're like, whoa. And all of a sudden, your family coming first, your job coming second, like all of a sudden you're like, if you're going to survive, you got to be able to fight back. And unfortunately, and I was one, for those of you that know me, and I recognize a lot of faces here, I was never afraid to sort of differ with my party leadership when I thought they were wrong. And one of the things that I really believed in was campaign finance reform. And one of my heroes in life was John McCain. We are very close for lots of reasons. I was one of his national chairs. I traveled the country with him as well. And I was one of the 20-some Republicans. You weren't in the Congress then, were you, Mark? When we did the McCain Flamingo bill, I think that was in the late '90s, late '90s. I think Hastert was Speaker. But we have this procedure where you sign a discharge petition and it's automatically removed from the committee, so the committee chair can't block it from coming up. And so, but if you get 218 members to sign the discharge petition, it brings it to the House floor. And that's how we brought up campaign finance reform. There were like 20 of us that walked down to the Speaker's dais and on the floor of the House. We signed our names, and with that, the clerk shut the book, and that then freed the bill out of committee, and we dealt with campaign finance reform. We passed it, but sadly, and I'm not a lawyer, the courts threw a lot of it out. And that was going to put really, I think, and I think is, in St. Joe, I'm getting about 6 mailers a day, and you see these ads. At least I'm in the South Bend media, so I don't see some of the Michigan media that's coming in terms of these ads that are knocking you backwards and forwards. But it's an ugly process. The negative campaigns, and a lot of it, to me, is fueled by the dark money. Because when we did an ad, whether it be radio or TV, this is Fred Upton, and I'm paid for by the Upton for All of Us campaign, and I authorized this. That's now part of the tagline. Well, the dark money doesn't have that tagline, and for the most part, you really are in the dark. Whether the ad's for you or against you, you cannot cross that barrier. It's hidden. But that has fundamentally changed elections from when I was first elected in '86 to where we are today.
So, Mark, you had some humdinger of elections. Going back, comparing your first days in the state legislature to then your Congress, you had an election and a re-election that were tough races, and then governor. I mean, what did you see as far as a change in how campaign finance affected those elections? And then kind of talk a little bit about how you think this is diminishing trust in systems.
Thank you. President Montgomery, it's great to be on campus here as a Bronco. We have 2 Broncos in my family, and trying to fill the pipeline with some of our grandkids here too. But it's great to see some old friends and to meet lots of you. As I think about this panel, it is what we as citizens can do to increase trust in our government and in the integrity of our elections. And so I appreciate you all taking the time to do that, and hopefully we can stimulate some thinking on your part. Yeah, my political career, I first ran for local office in Battle Creek in 1993 and didn't know anything about campaigns. And then fast forward, 1996 was my first campaign and election for the state house. And Fred and I have something in common. I think the incumbent you beat was in your party in a primary. I flipped a very purple, red-leaning district. I'm a Democrat in Battle Creek, and so that was my first election all the way through. My last was 2014 when I ran for governor. And I'm a private citizen like most of you. My day job is that I am still involved in campaigns, trying to help candidates and some issues and so forth to you know, help persuade voters on behalf of our clients. How many of you think that money in campaigns influences the behavior of candidates or future office? Yeah, show your hand. Yeah, I do too. I mean, and I was on the receiving end of that. My first campaign in 1996, I remember going to a training. You know, again, I was running against an incumbent, tough swing seat. It was a workshop on how to raise $100,000. Does that sound like a lot of money? Yeah, that was 1996. And that's like chump change for...
You got to do that every week now.
Yeah. I think there are state legislative campaigns that are probably 7 figures. So like $1 million. I mean, you know, as expensive as congressional races used to be. And so, and that isn't counting the outside semi-reported, unreported dark money. We don't know who the donors are, right, for a lot of these independent expenditure ads. But yeah, the game has changed, and not for the good. And you know, you do have the power. You know, we passed Voters Not Politicians, and I think the gerrymandering of districts and the extremists in both parties sort of fosters distrust and some disillusionment, and I would say some questionable policy outcomes. We also twice have passed voting reforms, including under, I think Promote the Vote was the lead group there. And by the way, students are empowered even more, including same-day voter registration, right? And sure you have Dropbox or 2 on campus and early voting and all that. But fast forward, my first congressional campaign, so I was in the legislature for 12 years, and the price of poker kept going up, but not exorbitantly. My goal, which I accomplished in 2008, running against another incumbent of the opposite party, was to raise $3 million. Does that sound like a lot of money? That's a lot of money. And I did it, and it was a very expensive, hard-fought race. There were outside groups involved. But I do want to sort of lay down a historical marker. It was in my one and only term in Congress, and that was the 111th Congress. Fred and I had the honor of serving with Fred, and we had some mutual mentors and close colleagues like John Dingell and so forth and many others. But that's when the U.S. Supreme, and I think Fred was alluding to this, the U.S. Supreme Court passed the Citizens United decision. And I said at that time, and I think I am right, I stand behind this, that candidates would become incidental in campaigns, that the outside money, the dark money would like subsume, certainly neutralize, but would play I think distort, candidly, the power of the electorate. I mean, voters still make the decision, right? It's up to you, but the information you're receiving. So my 2010, and I'll land the plane here in a second. I was thinking about the aviation college a few minutes ago in my old hometown, I'm very proud of. But 2010, all told, with direct money from candidates, and I had a rematch in President Obama's first midterm, which did not go well for people of my party after we passed the Affordable Care Act and all of that. That was the most expensive race, congressional race in the country, all told. And I think the number was, all told, was something like $21 million in 2010. Today, that's chump change. And so the power of outside groups, money in politics, is a corrupting influence. That coupled with gerrymandering and, just candidly, something I want to talk about as I wrap up these comments is sort of the responsibility of elected officials in the present state of affairs and misinformation and sort of perpetuating all kinds of doubt about the system. It's ultimately our responsibility or that of our former colleagues.
It takes away from legislating. That's why you sent these folks to D.C. They got to, you want them to read the bill and study and figure out and how to build a coalition to get things done. And when instead you're spending time on the phone because you can't do it in your federal office.
Yeah,
I would. Against the law, you got to go someplace else.
I would go to D.C. on Mondays and immediately get picked up by my staff at Reagan National Airport, taken to the Democratic National Committee offices there on New Jersey Southeast to do fundraising calls, okay, until we had some evening votes. But I was there until I flew back on Thursday at every available moment when we weren't voting, weren't doing committee hearings, particularly what are called committee markups, where you're voting, or when if I ever had a constituent visiting me in Washington, D.C., believe me, I was there. But yeah, it just distorts lawmakers' attention. I think it distorts their priorities. It disadvantages the people that send them there.
Well, that's a gloomy picture from two former...
But we can make it better.
Yes, we can. But let's talk about something more positive. Chris, in the last couple of election cycles, we've had a lot of changes to voting, which again puts citizens more in charge because it's easier to vote. Talk to us about what those changes are, especially as we enter the election this year, and help us understand, why there are people that still don't trust these changes, and what should we be thinking about?
So in that picture I painted before, I will say the legislature in Michigan did a beautiful job with administration and security. Our qualified voter file, our statewide file, our voting systems, the protections we have are excellent. But we could never get over the hump in terms of increasing access. And just quite frankly, the Republican Party controlled the state Senate for 40 years. And they refused to implement no reason absentee voting. That polled in the 60 and 70 percentiles consistently through this state. And for whatever reason, they thought it was disadvantage to their outcomes, and they refused to do it. And each Secretary of State, obviously my first secretary was Richard Austin. He was a Democrat. He was all for it. The first time there was a bill on no reason was 1990. Secretary Miller, Candace Miller, Secretary Land, Secretary Johnson, Ruth Johnson, all of them had a no reason AV proposal on the table. And it was contrary to their own parties, the last three who were Republicans. And Ruth Johnson said, look, I don't like this, but I think this is the only thing I can get through. Let's just see if they'll buy. You can get a no reason absentee ballot if you go to the office and show ID before the election. And they wouldn't even buy that. Now, that's professional staff. I mean, it's okay to go into a precinct on election day with people sort of like me, you know, who are not great detectives looking at IDs and everything. But you go to a clerk's office? No. And she and I had a discussion, and I said, you know, this is 2015. I said, you might want to tell your friends over there that someday somebody's going to take that to the ballot. And when they do, it's not just going to be for no reason absentee. It's not going to be a single issue. And sure as heck, 2018, Promote the Vote went to the ballot. And not only did they have no reason AV in there, they had election day registration. Now, there's nothing the Republican Party would hate more than that. I mean, that's history. In my career, I would never have even walked into the legislature and say, hey, how about let's do some election day registration? I mean,
and Chris, you are a nonpartisan because you worked for both Democratic and Republican secretaries of state, right?
Yeah, I did. And, you know, most state election directors around the country, they come and go with their secretary. They're appointees. I was a civil servant. And when a secretary would come in, my statement to them is, you got elected to make policy, not me. I'm here to carry it out. I'd like to have my 2 cents in there, and they all allowed me to put my 2 cents in. But they're the ones that made the decision. That's how you survive, and that's the proper role for a state election director. And it's a shame in these other states where they turn people over because you get a lot of continuity goes out the door. So 2018, there you had it. No reason AV, election day registration. I mean, oh my God. And it passed with 67% of the vote. Now, you can argue that people didn't know what they're voting for, but I thought the ballot language was pretty clear. Pretty clear. And both of those reforms, I mean, they saved us in 2020. I mean, how prescient was that the voters voted that way before 2020? I'm not at all convinced that the legislature would have given us no reason AV in 2020, even with a pandemic. So we were over 50%. We were close to 60% by mail. So that was there. Now 2022 comes around, and we're right back to it. And I was involved in this one quite deeply, both drafting and drafting legislation afterwards. Everyone would always tell me, you can't do early voting in Michigan because of all these jurisdictions. And I said, yeah, you can. There are ways to do it where cities and townships and counties can work together like they are in Kalamazoo. It's a county system that they are running here. You don't have to open up every city and township to do it. You know, you go to Ohio, they have early voting, but there's only one site in every county. That's it. So you have lines. You know, Miami-Dade, huge metropolitan area, they have 18 sites. I mean, can you imagine how long those lines are? So here, yes, it can be done, and it is being implemented. And I urge you to use that and take advantage of it. You'll have 9 days before the election to do that, 2 full weekends. We also included in there postage paid for returning your absentee ballots and your applications. We did state-funded drop boxes, one for every 15,000 registered voters. So we're looking for equity across the state. The uniformity is what's important. We also dealt with the issues of canvassing elections. We made it very clear in the Constitution now that canvassing role is what the courts have said forever. It's a ministerial, non-discretionary job. I won't call you bean counters, but you're vote counters. And that's what you're there to do. You're not there to investigate. You're not there to check things out. You're there to record what was voted on election night. And then after you do your job, canvassers, then there are recounts and there are audits and the other things that are necessary. So 2022, we took big steps forward. We gave military 6 extra days after the election if their ballots are postmarked by election day. We made sure curing was part of the process so that if you make a mistake, you will get an opportunity to fix it. And that can go as long as 3 days after the election. And the legislature has also enacted pre-election processing and tabulation of absentee ballots 8 days before the election. In Detroit, where I worked in 2020 in TCF Center, we had to process 174,000 ballots beginning basically at 7 o'clock election day. And we got done Wednesday evening.
And you had to individually feed those into the machine to count them, right?
Well, we had high-speed readers then, but it took...
Still had to go individually.
You had to touch everyone. It was a long process. And I will tell you, we've gotten rid of our high-speed printers and we're now hand feeding because we will have 8 days to do this. And it's it's a cleaner system in the way that it looks. The challengers, we had all kinds of stuff about people thinking there were mechanics and electronics involved. Well, now it's just a tabulator like you see in a polling place. So I think we've made some great advances. I have concerns about the future of democracy. And the one thing that I'm very heartened about by these two proposals and the people who came out and voted for them is that the tools are all there for voters to continue to participate regardless of what other changes are made in our democratic process. And I think that's what's critical.
But I think it's important to recognize, I mean, there are still people who believe these systems aren't safe, they're not secure. It's out there. But I think I want to shift the topic because I think a lot of this goes back to now global threats to the erosion of trust in our democracy. So to all of you panelists, here's an interesting data point from Pew Research. They've been asking the same question for 60 years. Do the American people, quote, trust the government to do what is right just about always or most of the time? 60 years ago, that was at 77%. It's now at 22%. How much do you think the American people fully understand how much foreign global actors are trying to influence the erosion of trust that Americans have in our own institutions, whether it's government, higher education, banking, media?
Well, I don't know. I would guess that most voters don't think about that a lot. I think news followers have read and learned that both Russia and Iran have attempted to influence our elections, and there are probably others. And with bots and AI, it's real. And I don't know the easy response to that other than, federal, national security agencies, cracking down. I mean, this is a technology issue and challenge, and I'm sure there is a solution, and smart people are figuring that out. So that's very real. And I think this wasn't your question, but I think we need to think about, domestic threats. And by that, I mean elites, opinion leaders, including elections officials, including some candidates for the highest office that are intertwined with media and, again, AI, bots, social media, that perpetuate information. This is, and I want to be brief here, but this is not an election question, but an example of social media, and this was way back in 2009 when I was in Congress, and there was the Affordable Care Act, which the rise of the Tea Party, it was a heightened time, to say the least. It sort of is mild compared to a lot of things that have gone on since then. But I remember just receiving these mass emails from constituents, people that I had known, I'd gone to Rotary Club with in Battle Creek, and some of whom had been donors, and they're like sending me this bizarre stuff, and I was very earnest and would take my time and handwrite these responses, trying to dispel the misinformation about what was in that case the draft of the Affordable Care Act, and I just literally could not keep up. And it became apparent that I was getting like the same email from these trusted people, and it was like, how are they buying into this? But that's just a non-election example about how, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever people are using, stuff is so and then, not to name names, but I'll name names, the Elon Musks of the world or Zuckerbergs or whatever, sort of tamping down their protections, right? So it's sort of Wild West out there. So I'm concerned about the foreign threats, for sure, but really concerned about all of the misinformation that, in many cases, is intended to foster mistrust in our election systems and put into play, put questions in the minds of voters about whether they should trust the actual outcome of the election, especially if that candidate should lose. So
the world has changed a lot. Social media, no one knew what it was when we were first elected. TikTok, everyone thought that was maybe your grandfather's clock at their house. Didn't know that it would have videos as well that you could get on your phone. But for me, I've always wanted an educated electorate. Folks who would sit down maybe over the kitchen table, maybe talk with their spouse or their kids or their neighbors, say why they're voting for this person or that, man or woman. I split my ticket a lot of races. And they would, back then you had just, 3 TV stations, really. CBS, NBC, ABC, you didn't have the cable. And you had a newspaper that would actually list your votes, right? Every week. There'd be all the votes. Here's how so-and-so voted on these elections this week. Now you don't have that anymore. And you have all these other strange sources of media that some of them are bad. They're false. Take the TV station RT. That's Russian TV, but it's on a lot of our cable systems, and they have a little different story than us. And it's much harder then today to be that educated voter that I think all of us want. How do they stand? How do they stand on the issues? How do they care on this or that? So that's different, and so you need more time to figure it out. And you've got maybe more races than ever before as well. And let's face it, we have a very closely divided country, right? No matter what happens on November 5th, it's going to be really close in the Senate, U.S. Senate. It's going to be really close in the House. And we may not know for a couple of days who wins the presidency, and Michigan is one of those states. And some of these states, remember, 2016 is 10,700 votes? That's not a lot of votes in a state that you're going to have, 3.5 million, 4, maybe 5 million people vote? Who knows what? So that's what I, Fred Upton, always wanted. That's why I supported the motor voter bill back in, 92 or so, when the rest of the country was told to go, let's do what Michigan's doing. They're doing a good thing because this guy was in charge of elections, but that is that when you become a new driver, you're going to have the opportunity to register to vote. And by the way, you're going to take that driver's license and you're going to go, for me, the St. Joe City clerk, and I'll show that before I actually cast my ballot. I think that's a good thing. But it is much harder today for the general voter to figure out who they're going to vote for on an educated basis that might be different than how they voted maybe 10 or 20 years ago, because of the sources of information are different, and frankly, a number of them are wrong and misleading. And then you get those awful mailers in the mail, and you go, how could I ever vote for that nice Fred Upton who looks like, you know, every day you get some of those mailers in the mail, and it's just like, it's and again, back to our earlier conversation, a lot of it's coming from dark money.
So on CBS Sunday, this last Sunday, they had a segment on Finland. And Finland is starting to teach kindergartners how to find fake news. And they're literally showing them, you know, what to look for. And this will proceed with them through their grades, through secondary school, that will give them skills, both logical skills. Like one question was, well, here it says that an alien landed 4 years ago. And this little boy, yeah, see, well,
it's a different story.
I'm going to take Fred to Finland, and
I'll go.
yeah, me too. And so this young man about this tall goes, well, you know, I've never heard about that. I'm sure that if that were true, it would be all over the news, you know. So it's, again, that not only just looking at the advertisement, but the logic that goes along with it. So the Director of National Intelligence says that the Russians are here, the Iranians are here, and the Chinese are here. Those are the big three, right? And it's kind of interesting what they're doing with, you know, the new technologies. And they're really not all that good with it. They don't really know how yet to get it polished with their bots and the A1 stuff and all that, so that you don't know it. So for example, there was the Biden in New Hampshire, right? Saying, well, everybody knew that was bogus. I mean, it was such a clumsy job. But those days are coming where that's all going to work out, and they're going to figure that out. But right now, they're using it just to boost. So the Russians are boosting Trump. The Iranians, I don't know if they want Harris, but they certainly don't want Trump. Right. The Chinese aren't really weighing in on a candidate per se, but their stuff is using like fake newscasters to really talk about the drug use in America, the abortion issue, and the immigration issues, to just really stir up discord. So they're there, they've been there. I would think people in this country since 2016 have gotten much better at recognizing this stuff. But some are gonna be fooled, no question. And then, as Mark indicated, the domestic is there. And I don't know if that's a separate topic you want to do.
Should we view this as a new form of terrorism or warfare?
Can I give an example? Well, first, Ed, well, it sounds like we have two recommendations. We should hire a bunch of Finnish children. And I think, Mr. President, Western should start its Institute for Integrity in Politics and train up all these people that can detect this stuff. I'm going to ask a question. How many of you think there should be ramifications, that's not the word I was looking for elected officials that intentionally lie about their opponent? Because I think there should be. Right now, it falls under free speech. So independent groups cannot. So that's why, like, if Shower for Governor runs an ad that's completely untrue about my opponent, the TV stations are still required to run it. But if it's an independent group, then it can be pulled. Okay, so I saw an example this morning in my morning reading. And by the way, I think putting yourself on some sort of news diet or figuring out the things that are actually more likely to be truthful is a good way to go. Okay, because if you're sort of like doom scrolling, you're probably going to wind up with some Chinese-backed something or other. It was in the Indiana gubernatorial race. That race is this year, this cycle. And the Republican candidate for governor, Mike Braun, was he our colleague, your colleague in Congress?
No, he's a U.S. Senate now.
Okay, so he's in
he did not
the
serve in
lower
House.
chamber, the lower chamber. But he ran a TV ad that showed his opponent at a lectern with this crowd, and they were all holding up signs, and the sign on the podium and people were holding at this rally or town hall said something about banning gas stoves. This is this fake issue. Nobody wants to ban your gas stove or make you buy EVs. Okay, just in case you're wondering.
Just buy a Whirlpool. That's okay.
Right.
It's okay.
But
right?
so here's
stock went up $2.
So here's what they did. They showed two photos. They showed the original photo of the Democratic candidate for governor and the sign at the podium had her name on it. I can't remember her name. It doesn't matter. And all the rally goers with signs. And this AI used that photo but changed out all of the signs to give you the impression that this was a rally about taking away your gas stove. Now, I think there should be consequences. That was the word I was looking for. But, there aren't any. So that is an example of what is wrong with politics and campaign politics and as it relates to speech.
Well, let's talk about the citizens' role in all of this. I do think that the citizens are kind of taking back in certain ways, and I think the more that these influences from outside, whether it's big money, dark money, foreign sources, the citizens are finding ways to do it. Two examples would be Bernie Sanders, when he first ran for president, the donations from small donors just was a tidal wave, and it blew the political establishment away with how much folks would give in small dollars. On the other side, Trump voters confounded pollsters in 2016 and showed up in numbers that they could not predict, even somewhat in 2020. So in both cases, on the right and the left, the citizens were saying, no, we're taking back control of the system to do that. I mean, what else could we be looking at that citizens can do? Because, you could be looking at laws to regulate lies speech. Fred, you did the oversight of big tech in Congress for a long time and the media. I mean, again, you could look at government roles of oversight of big tech and the media, but is that the answer? Or, should this be more of a grassroots, citizens having to say, we have to take the responsibility to find the truth through the clutter?
I think citizens ought to step forward. Citizens ought to become election inspectors. Almost every clerk's looking for them. And in Detroit, we're looking for Republican election inspectors. It's hard to find Republican election inspectors in Detroit. And there's areas on this side of the state where it's hard to find Democratic election inspectors. But that's where you go, particularly if you have doubts. Step up, sit down at the table, learn the process, and make your decision. Become a challenger with your political party or with some of the other groups that put challengers out there. In Detroit, in 22, we had a good complement of Republican inspectors, and we had certainly a good complement of Republican challengers. And they were the most bored people after, days that went until 2 in the morning, because there was nothing to see. But their presence is important. I mean, that's part and parcel of our system, is to have partisan challengers at the table observing. Those are two ways for people to actually get involved. Now, that's not going to involve millions of people, but if each one of those people go back to their family and say, hey, here's what I saw, which wasn't a lot of anything, sooner or later that word starts to spread. Don't, if you can't rely on the election official who's defending his or her system, rely on the observers who have come and watched. Now, there wasn't any big announcement from the Republican Party that they didn't see anything after 2022, but in essence, there was also not an announcement that they saw something. And that's important. And that's a big step forward, and we'll see where we go this year.
So an advantage that certainly Mark and I had as members of Congress, you get to know a lot of people. I know a lot of you in this room. You figure out real quick who's honest and who may not be. And from my vantage point, and I, again, 36 years in the House, I got to know all my county officers. I got my county commissioners, my treasurers, my clerks, my register of deeds. So I'm in those courthouses. I mean, that was just one of my routines. In the old days, that's the only thing you had to do to campaign. Just went to the courthouse. If you had their support, you're done. You don't have to do anything else. As before they did TV, especially if your face was made for radio. You didn't have yard signs. Yeah. I have this relative, Kate. They say I'm adopted, but that's just the way it is. But you didn't have yard signs until the 70s. I'm talking to the real old days when in the 50s when you campaigned the courthouse. But I gotta say that when I got to know my county clerks, all of them, boy, they're so hardworking. The individuals, men and women both. Cass County here at Kalamazoo, Young's here was county clerk for I don't know how many years, 50. You got to know them, and they ran it like a book. I's are dotted, T's are crossed. I think you saw that, I'm sure, over in your side of things in Calhoun County and the counties that you represented. You got to have trust in those people. And what I'm enlightened by is the changes that we've seen. So we don't have Chads anymore, and we all remember what that was, and punching those things through. And I'm going to be helping my mom vote. She turned 95 yesterday, and she doesn't miss elections, but her eyesight's not very good. When I saw her this morning, anyway. Make sure that circle is filled in. We'll be talking about all the different people, and she'll be able to sign her name on it, and I'll sign my name on the absentee ballot as well and take it. But I am more enlightened about the system today than it ever was before because of the changes, particularly that Chris was able to get through, working with our legislators, working with our clerks. And we'll see what happens on November 5th, but there are not a lot of other constructive improvements that I would be able to suggest and implement to make sure that our elections are safe and secure. But it is our responsibility as individuals to really, figure out who we're going to vote for, try to do it in advance before you get there. They've got those sample ballots are available online and maybe in a newspaper too if you still get it in terms of what's going on so that we're ready.
So we've got a lot of great questions from the audience, and we're running short on time. So I want to do some quick power answers from the panel here. If you look around this room, maybe there's a sense that we're all seasoned voters. Somebody said, well, what would you say to newly eligible voters who may feel a great deal of disenchantment with our country's political system? How do you help encourage engagement?
I think they need to research. I think we need to help them find neutral or factual sources of information. But look, we're all motivated by issues, I think, at the end of the day. Sometimes it's people and qualities we like, but for younger voters, there's so many issues that they care about, whether it's climate change, gun violence, equity, equality, human rights, reproductive freedom, what have you. And I just think we need to help them find sources of information or where they can find candidates that they can believe in. We need to provide access to candidates and organizations that can, provide those educational opportunities. And, candidly, one of the things we've done, and Chris talked about the 18 and 20 promote the vote constitutional amendments that we all voted for, is just make it easy and convenient. I mean, it is right that there are those, and I was not an attorney, but I was using my sort of those skills of logic to point out that Chris was nonpartisan, and he cited folks of a particular party that saw it in their interest to make it harder for people to vote. It is easy to vote, and what you've done here, Mr. President, to make it super, super easy, but I think it's the information, access to those that are running for office, those organizations, that I think is really the key. Look, and I think young people have the future of our country in their hands. I mean, it is time to hand over, the reins to our country. Our job as elders should be to make sure there is a planet that our grandkids can inherit, and there is a society that they can believe in and be proud of. So I think broad answer, but we cannot give up. I think we need to sort of hand them the reins. It is their future, it is their country, and I believe they will decide the outcome of this election.
So let me just give a pat on the back to the former members of the Congress organization. I'm on the board. It's an unpaid position. But we have about, I would guess, about 80 active members that are working on a bipartisan basis. And for a number of years, we've had a program called Congress to Campus, where 2 members of Congress, Republican and Democrat, will go to a campus and will allow the university to run the program. So last week I was at UConn. My wife goes, "Where did you get this UConn hat?" I said, "Well, they gave it to me, but I'm. But, I was at Suffolk University. I didn't even know where it was. It's on Beacon Hill in Boston. We spoke to the law school. I mean, we spent 3 days. I had a former Democrat, Joe Huffle, who ran for governor in Pennsylvania and lost, and so he's now a member of the group. I was at the Naval Academy last year. I was at Michigan. I was at Cornell. So coming back from UConn last week, I was there Wednesday and Thursday. They are and we met with hundreds and hundreds of students. We did podcasts. We did a TV thing similar to what we're going to do tonight at the Ford Library with Rick Album from Channel 8, where we talked about issues and how we ought to work together. Loretta Sanchez was my partner, Democrat from California, who lost to Harris in the U.S. Senate primary. In the general election, she lost to her. They have the jungle primary in California, so they take the top 2 vote getters, and only because Obama endorsed Harris at the end did Loretta not beat her. At least that's what she said. But she's a dynamo. But on campus, and I'm sure you see it here. I mean, this wonderful new facility. But when I was in office, I was on campus a couple times every month. It's an exciting place. I mean, it keeps us young. I mean, they got new ideas. You got to be ready sit on the edge of your seat based on the questions that you're going to get, because they are, in fact, engaged and they know it's their future. And these issues are important. So the good thing is, like in the past, young voters, that was pretty, they didn't really vote all that often. I'm convinced that it's going to be the other way around. I look at my 2 kids. I look at their spouses. I look at their friends. And they want to be engaged. They do care. And Chris, when he's going to give you these numbers, it's amazing the number of voters that we've had here now in Michigan. Just in Michigan over the last 6 cycles or so. Rattle off those numbers that you told us before in terms of the upward slope of Michiganders participating.
Before I do that, my pithy answer that you were looking for. You know what your parents told you the first time you jumped in the swimming pool? Plug your nose and jump in. And that's what I would tell young people. and it won't be your only time. You just got to jump in.
Well,
Numbers, oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, the numbers really since 2018 have taken this tremendous jump. So normally before that time, presidential elections were around 4.8 million. The gubernatorial elections were 3.2. In 2018, which was a gubernatorial election, I think we had 4.1 million. So more, about a million more than before. In 2020, instead of 4.8 million, in the middle of a pandemic, we had 5.5 million. Then that is a huge, over 500,000, about 700,000 more people voted. And in 2022, another gubernatorial election, we had 4.3 million. So this has been an upward trend line. I don't expect that to change this time. Sometime when everybody's singing Kumbaya and everyone's happy, it may go back down again, which is okay, you know, if everybody's happy with things. But with what's going on now, people are locked in, they're paying attention, and they're going to turn out.
Chris, I'm going to combine a couple of these questions for you. First, can the detailed ballot process you shared be found online for those that are interested, and especially for individuals who are fearful of voting fraud? How can we point them to reliable sources?
I'm going to point you to one really easy place, michigan.gov/vote. And that's going to take you to the Secretary of State's site. And on there, you will find a total explanation of the election process in great detail. And you will also find the debunking of many of the election rumors and myths. It's a great place to start. And I would recommend everybody start there. You will also find your ballot tracker there. So if you're voting by mail, that's going to tell you whether or not your application was received, when the ballot was sent to you, and the date that your ballot returned there. And they have a new feature that they just rolled out last week, which is you can get on an email list, and it will send you notifications about your ballot being returned and whatnot. So there are good things coming there. There's also a permanent absentee ballot, which was one of the 22 reforms. So if you want a ballot sent to you every election without sending an application each time, you can get that form there and also submit it.
Another question to you, Chris, was explain the process of curing post-election, and is this why it takes so long to award Electoral College votes?
It's not connected to Electoral College votes. So curing is your signature didn't match. So they now are mandated to send you either by mail, if you've given them your phone, they can do it by text, or they can do it by email if you've provided those. And you've got until 3 days after the election, Friday, to make that, update that signature. You know, a lot of us use what I call our credit card signatures. You know how, nobody looks at your credit card signature and they just scrawl these things out. Do not sign your absentee ballot envelope with that signature. I can guarantee you it'll probably be rejected. The signatures that they are using to compare are the signatures from your driver's license. That's what everybody has on file. And most of you were probably pretty careful when you made that signature.
Helpful to know.
So there's a few questions here about the passion from outside groups, and is that impacting divisiveness, and Citizens United and the amount of money. But I think what it boils down to is there's a question that says, would an enforceable code of ethics, including conflict of interest guidelines, blunt the impact of dark money and help restore confidence in government?
Yes, I think at a federal level, we've amended our Constitution here, and that was the people that did. Voters Not Politicians was an amazing example of, this is a group that didn't ask permission, they all volunteer signatures, it was amazing. To amend the US Constitution is much more difficult, so it really does take the Congress to enact those national voting reforms, and they should do it. They should absolutely do it.
It's pretty hard to pass anything with a 2/3 vote, House and Senate, and send it to
I
the
didn't
states.
say it was easy.
And I don't, some laws, again, I'm not a lawyer, but I don't even necessarily know how caps on individuals donating could be viewed necessarily. If someone challenged it and was willing to pay for the challenge to go through the judicial process, I'm not sure how that would stand. Who's to say that, it's like selling a car. If someone wants to buy my car for $45,000, it's yours, right? Who's to say that if someone wants to give that much money, so, it's a balance. It really is a balance. And, as much as I'd like to say, why can't we shorten these election cycles? Get the mailers, people come to your door. Wouldn't it be nice like what they do in the UK where it's only like, I don't know, 60, 90 days, something like that. But then, of course...
Democrats kind of tried to do
But that helps but that helps incumbents. I mean, that really helps incumbents. I don't know, Mark, if you could have won if you only had a 60 or 90-day window back in whenever it was that you ran, or if I wouldn't. I needed every day that I had. So it's all sort of, it's in balance. Do we need a code of ethics? Yes, we do. They did change. So on the ads, it says, I'm Fred Upton and I paid for this ad. But the dark money doesn't have that. And so I think it would be wiser maybe to say, if you're an independent expenditure, you got to do something more than, and nobody hears it or sees it because it's on too briefly on TV or on the internet.
We're essentially out of time. I'm going to throw one question out there that could take another half hour, but I'm going to ask you to think quickly on it.
Yes.
Mark and Fred, what are your thoughts on ranked choice voting? And actually, I want to hear Chris's thoughts on this too.
I like it. I think it brings candidates to the middle rather than just winning a partisan primary by a plurality, not even a majority oftentimes. I think it's working. Fred mentioned it's not ranked choice in California, but jungle primary. Some states are sort of doing that and then applying. That's what Alaska does, and actually there's a group trying to undo that, and then ranked choice voting is used in the general election. But I think it hopefully will be coming to Michigan. It's on the ballot in a number of other places. I think it's a good democracy reform.
I actually like the jungle primary better, where you so for us in Michigan, we would vote in August in the primary, except everyone would be there. So it would be your Democrat, your Constitution Party, your Green Party, your Republican Party, they'd all be together, and they take the top two. And those, unless you get 50%. So in Louisiana, if you get 50%, then you don't have the general election, because in essence, you won. And that's happened before. I want to say Steve Scalise usually wins in his primary and over 50%, and then he doesn't have to worry about November. But you take the top two, and then they have the runoff. So that was the runoff that I sort of mentioned between Harris and the woman that I was with up at UConn, Loretta Sanchez, this last week. Ranked choice is a little more complicated because maybe you have 6 people that are running: Taxpayer Party, Green Party, Constitution Party. Some states have a Right to Life Party, Republican Party. And all of a sudden you have to say, well, who do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then if no one gets 50%, then they add the number. They take the people who voted the 6th choice goes their second choice votes go to. And it takes a little longer to try and figure that out. It works. Well, Mark, I don't know enough about it. Maine has it for their congressional race, but I think the jungle primary is a little simpler. And you have what I would say is more mainstream candidates that then prevail in the November election versus, remember, our primaries, you often have only about a 10 or 15% turnout. August, we're someplace else. So you only need 7.5% to win. And that's you get a little better to me with a jungle, but Michigan voters ought to decide. Other states, that's a state prerogative, and that's what other states have done.
Well, Go ahead, Chris.
I just say there's a lot of reforms floating around out there. They need to be looked at very carefully in terms of how they affect primaries and then whether it's appropriate to do them in the general. I've heard one say, yeah, do ranked choice voting in the primaries and then have fusion voting in the general election where minor parties can also nominate same candidates that the major parties do, for example.
New York does that.
New York does that. And, you know, the deal is of the ranked choice voting, particularly in the general election, is you're giving people a second vote. And it's like, okay, you can go, I'm going to say this kind of bluntly, you can go vote for the loser, your third party, to make you feel good. But then your second choice you can make for one of the two major parties because you're going to be wiped off for the second round. And if the major parties aren't over 50%, they're going to get your second vote to maybe push them over the top. And I think people need to think about that real hard. And they need to think about the national popular vote movement, which is a way to negate the Electoral College by an interstate compact so that the person who wins the most votes actually becomes the president. Shocking change.
And on that note, I think we will leave it here. So I want to really thank our distinguished panel. And these gentlemen have to go to do another event yet tonight, and they're so busy. What it tells you is they're great public servants. And so I want to really thank them for what they've done. And thanks to Citizen Rising for bringing us this program. And thanks to all of you for showing up and being a part of the conversation and the solution. So now participation is next. Get out and vote. Thank you.